We now return to Mega March. Plasma Power!
Number 6.
Hello everyone, ColeManX here. Mega Man X3. This cutscene, man. This cutscene. Alright, I remember way back in the early days of the internet, just seeing screenshots from this, and having just no idea where they came from. It's just all these, familiar things, familiar characters, familiar enemies, but they're drawn. It looks like they're from something that's animated, like I had no idea what it was. I remember seeing, pictures of X pulling his hand into the Buster. I remember seeing Vile and the X Hunters. I remember seeing X10 holding a saber for some reason. Years after that, I finally got to see what it was, and it lived up to the expectations. X just running along the highway and blasting through B-bladers, and just in the water, and he just shoots the guy in the face, and then he crashes into Launch Octopus, and they both explode. And then he's in the volcano stage from X2, and just... so good. I love that X just fights all the rival characters at once, and then Zero just swoops in and saves the day. As a kid especially, it just made Zero seem even cooler. He was basically the Green Ranger, He waits until all the chips are down and then boom, just swoops in and saves the day instantly. And just the way that Vile just falls apart and Zero changes back into his X1 look, I don't know why, but I love it. X10 is just great, and seeing him holding the saber, it's so good. And then X, just running and then just puts on the first armor, and seeing that animated, it was just, it was so cool. And then he's fighting X1 Sigma. It just looks so cool, but then they both go X2, we get second armor and then X2 Sigma. And they're just fighting, and, X destroys Sigma or whatever, and we see that it's Doppler, watching this whole thing going on. It's such a cool opening. It's really a shame that throughout X3, we never see the third armor animated like this. We see the first and second, but, oh well. As for the normal opening, it's fine. It's a bit slow, but it really sets the mood, it's got this, dreary music, and, it's like, oh, everything was better, but then it wasn't, and there's a new bad guy. And then there's just that one shot of X and Zero, in high detail, and they're just, rushing forward, and that will never not be the coolest thing.
First and foremost, I want to say X3 has one of the best intro musics ever. The intro stage, top notch. I love it. Now, I'm not just talking about the intro cutscene where it's playing the creepy music and it's telling you what Dr. Doppler's been doing. I'm going to include the whole shebang in this because I feel like the whole thing is great. You start off with the creepy music and it's doing these panning shots across, Doppler Town, and it's got the spotlights going, and it's ooh, Dr. Doppler did some weird stuff. There's this virus going on and all this junk, and then you start seeing the military music starts kicking in, and it's bum 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 bum, and it's really effective. It's ooh, this is a war going on. Up to this point, you've kind of always known that there's been a battle happening between the Maverick Hunters or whatever, but I feel like X3 is the first time it truly and properly showed you the scale of the Maverick Hunters. In X1, you don't even really get to see them. It's just X and Zero, and that's fine, because, in that game, it's just kind of them against the Mavericks. And in X2, I think you get, one cutscene where it's, Dr. Kane in, the HQ or something like that, and it's alright, a little command room. But, X3 is the first time we actually see the Maverick Hunters under attack, and we get to see the scale of their HQ, and you're whoa, it's humongous. And then, Doppler launches his attack, and, now we're going from this, reserved military-style music, gearing up for war, to this like crazy action-packed, really intense intro song, and you're like, oh my god, the Maverick Hunter's getting attacked, and you see like a helicopter coming overhead, and there's lasers flying left and right. This is like the first time we actually get to see like actual warfare in like Mega Man. And I thought that was really cool. And then you're watching these things, you know, fight the Maverick Hunters, and there's lasers going here and there. And then all of a sudden, boom, our two heroes jump in. It's like such a dramatic entrance. You got X jumping onto the thing, and he's blasting this thing over and over again. And then Zero hangs on, and you're like, oh man, what's Zero going to do? It's X and Zero. They're together. They're going to like team up and be awesome. And then Zero cuts down the helicopter with the saber. Like, it's so cool. It's amazing. It's really awesome just how they managed to, you know, hype up. Like, now it feels like an action movie. Like, I'm not just watching, you know, like the intro scene. Like, that was like an action movie moment, you know what I mean? Like, the heroes jump onto a helicopter and blow it up and then land safely as it explodes behind them or something. Just really awesome stuff, and that kind of sets the whole tone for X3, in my opinion, as like an action movie kind of tone. And so I really love the intro to X3. I think that's great.
Hey folks, Protodude here, looking at the opening of Mega Man X3. To be honest, I really don't have that much to say about the Super Nintendo version's opening. For me, it's not exactly memorable, but I will say I do. I really liked the sprite work here, especially that really great shot of X and Zero, kind of the bust they got going on where it's their head down. It's a really cool action pose, and the colors are just top notch right there. But I will say, I loved X3's PlayStation Sega Saturn opening. I don't like it as much as, say, X4. That's just a whole other league. But I have a lot of nostalgia for X3's opening. Granted, it does get pretty off-model from time to time. Just watching the thing, X kind of changes shape here and there. Kind of funny. One moment he'll be, I don't know, kind of big and bulky with a bulging chest that would make Ruby Spears Mega Man proud. And next he's just not as detailed and a little loopy looking, like when he changes into his first armor. It looks very uncomfortable. Kind of an odd looking pose. But the idea behind the opening is really neat. It's basically recapping really quickly the events of X1 and X2. Just X kind of going through, doing battle, equipping himself with the armor, and yeah, there's this really cool little throwdown with Sigma. And yeah, speaking of off-model, Sigma's chin is pretty large at one point. Yeah, and Sigma changes forms too, on the fly, and it's really neat. It's like a neat interpretation of what these battles would look like. You know, and again, X4 is on a whole other level here, but I feel like this does a really cool job of, you know, kind of animating how these battles might have taken place if it were an anime, so to speak. My favorite shot, without a doubt, is you know, that brief pan to Zero, and he's got like that look on his face. He's like, oh, and then, you know, he spots X, and he goes, you know, gives him a good old thumbs up. It's adorable. It's very cool. Yeah, X gives one back. Yeah, this is a fun opening, and I remember very well seeing GIFs of it just plastered all over Mega Man fan sites back in the day, just throughout the late 90s and 2000s. And, you know, when I was kind of getting into Mega Man in earnest, when I started getting consoles and actually able to play them, I remember struggling to figure out where these clips came from. You know, I was a kid, wasn't very internet savvy, and honestly, information back then was kind of sparse and in between. So it took many years for me to learn, you know, X3 was ported to the PlayStation. And then it became a battle of like, oh, I want this on my PlayStation. Oh, region locking's a thing? Okay. You know, stuff you weren't exactly in the know when you were a kid. But yeah, Just looking back on it now, it's great. It's fun. Probably the weakest of the animated full motion Mega Man openings, but it's got its charm. It's got its charm, all right.
Howdy folks, ShadowRock here. Oh baby, we're getting into the all-time favorites now. If we were to take the Super Nintendo version of Mega Man X3 on its own merits, the opening would probably be much lower on my list. Luckily for me, my first time experiencing X3 was on the GameCube Mega Man X collection. And that collection is significant for having the PS1 version of Mega Man X3 on it, which added the full motion video opening and other sequences. Maybe that's why I prefer the soundtrack to the 32-bit versions with that CD quality compared to the Super Nintendo version, because the former is really the one I grew up with. And I can't even say it was a bad childhood. Seeing the FMV opening for X3 for the first time was really cool. It's almost a look into what if Mega Man X had gotten an anime in the early 90s, instead of whatever the heck that was in Ruby Spears Mega Man. There's a few reasons why I love this opening so much and why it's in my top 5 easily. Number 1, it made Mega Man X himself look extremely awesome. The first time you see X at the beginning, it's like, oh no, not the bees! But wait, there's X, and he's Super Saiyan! Taking out those 2 Beybladers with a single charge shot. I wish I could do that in X1. And then in the next shot, he easily takes out both the Sea Dragon mini-boss and Launch Octopus himself by colliding them together. This animation is so freaking good. Number 2 is the simple fact that this opening takes us through the events of the previous 2 games, but in a way that it doesn't feel like a total flashback, but more like a remix of events, with enough little references sprinkled in that avid Mega Man fans can appreciate. And the whole remix idea I was referring to comes into play in the next shot, as X is running out of the volcano from Flame Stag stage, like a bad A, might I add. But once he reaches the top, it's not the rest of Flame Stag stage, but instead he finds himself at the front of Sigma's base, with the X-Hunters there waiting for him. Okay. To make things even more confusing, Vile shows up behind him, so now suddenly we're having a recreation of the first battle of Vile from X1, right in front of the X-Hunters. Right after that though, always the one to have the dramatic entrances, Zero rescues X once again by just splitting Vile down in half. Wow, that's brutal. Followed by the famous thumbs up gif that we all like to use. And then check this out. In the shot after Zero rescues X from Vile, you can see that he's in his X2 design with the shoulder pads, right? But then in the next shot, when Zero is blocking the X-Hunters from following X into the base, suddenly he transformed back into his X1 design, albeit still holding his Z-Saber. So that's when it's like, okay, this opening is not really canon, but like I said, it's a remix of different references from throughout the last 2 games that really is pretty cool to see. Speaking of cool, if any of you have seen the Third Armor X animation in Rockman X Dive, this is the sequence right here that it references. X going into his first armor and dashing right into the door in the nick of time, doing the roll to dodge Sigma's sword, and then going into second armor X immediately. Sigma goes into his X2 design, and finally, not a double charge shot. Hey, just like the Third Armor X animation. I still think that's one of the coolest Easter eggs. The final shot of the opening just has Dr. Doppler watching the events unfold through his magical energy ball, and he's just got that face like, oh god, look at this guy, he just defeated my master. How the heck did he do that? What a bunch of baloney. Hey guys, come over and check this out. This is garbage. Then all the Mavericks appear and you see Bit and Byte turn towards Dr. Doppler like, oh, okay then. Does that mean all these guys were just watching X fight Sigma at the end of X2? In canon, probably not. But really, the FMV sequence is such a fun opening. The music is great and fitting as well, no matter if you watch with the English music or the Japanese song. They're both pretty good. And just the first time I watched the FMV on the collection back in the day, I fell in love with the animation right away. A bit more retro compared to X4, but still really awesome. But then of course there's the Super Nintendo version of the opening, which is still in the PS1 version. And it just tells us all about what Dr. Doppler is up to, how the Maverick Hunter base gets attacked, conveniently after X and Zero get sent out to deal with the whole issue. That's a definite "it's a trap" moment. Also, I've always found the character renders for X and Zero and X3 to look kind of cursed for me. I don't know, it looks like they tried way too hard to make them look 3D, but instead it just came out looking awkward. But hey, that's just my opinion. Otherwise, I don't have a lot to say about the Super Nintendo opening. It's just a lot of story exposition and kind of boring, to be honest. Like I said, this would be way lower on my list if it wasn't for that FMV. But hey, at least the game itself starts off explosively. In the last game, we saw X just run into a Mechanoid with a ride chaser, but now in X3, he just starts by jumping on top of a Beyblader and shooting it to death. Or you know, X3's version of a Beyblader. You know what I mean. Zero helps too, of course, and yeah, man, they're really hardcore in this one. The 32-bit version of X3 has a FMV of the same scene, but it's just more detailed and showing that X is looking a little bit desperate as he jumps on the Beyblader, so it just shows a little bit more context on the situation. Although the tail end of the FMV is kind of ruined by the fact that, you know, this is the PS1. FMVs at that time always had a lot of visual noise, and so it ruins it when it goes back to the Super Nintendo graphics, and you can still tell that it's an FMV, so that part doesn't look as great when compared to the actual Super Nintendo version. But hey, whatever, it's still pretty cool. I'll just end by saying X3 isn't my favorite X game, but it does start off really great, especially thanks to the 32-bit versions, and really, that's all you can ask for from a Mega Man opening. Definitely a top 4 intro for me.